Good morning, Gathya. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good to have you up. It's almost like a year and a half since we had the last podcast.
Nice to be back. Thank you.
Yeah. And we are here to talk about the most popular thing.
Yep.
So I don't know how much of, there's a lot of talks going on about the change in the Bill C-60.
Yeah.
So what is a significant change?
So the bill generally talks about a lot of different acts, but let's focus on the Residential Tenancies Act, which is the Landlord Tenant Board stuff. So there are a few big changes. There's divide about whether this is good for landlords, good for tenants, good for both sides. On the reading of it, it does look like it's more landlord friendly, but understanding that landlords were already at a disadvantage, let's call it, in the sense of the act was meant to protect tenants. The Landlord Tenant Board is definitely more tenant friendly, et cetera. So in terms of the big changes, the first one is non-payment of rent. Before or up until this bill, non-payment of rent, you had to give your tenant 14 days at a minimum to bring it into good standing or leave. That is now 7 days, which is a very short amount of time. Like if you think about it, that's not even going to get you to another paycheck. Like say you're waiting for a paycheck to make that payment, that won't even take you that far. So it is a very tight timeline. Mind you, if they don't leave, which most tenants don't leave by that termination date, you still will have to go through the Landlord Tenant Board process, get an order for eviction and go through that. So it doesn't stop that process, but that first step, it cuts it in half, which is pretty significant.
So someone's rent is due on December 1st. You issue the N11.
N4.
N12.
N4.
N4 on December the 7th.
Yep.
And they still don't bring the rent up to date.
So you can only issue it the day after. So you'd have to issue it
let's say December
2nd, and then 7 days later. If they don't, then you still have to go through the L1 process. So you file an application with the Landlord Tenant Board to get a hearing date. Now hearing dates are still 90 days later. So it's not like just because this 7 days gets cut, 7 days later your tenant's out. Understand that we still have to go through the process.
So that's what I don't want people to think, audience to think, okay, now 7 days I can get the tenant evicted.
And mind you, if they bring the rent into good standing before the hearing, then the hearing's not going to take place. You now have a tenant that's back in good standing and you carry on with your life. So it does only change that first step of instead of 14 days, 7 days. The next change is N12 notices, which you briefly touched on. An N12 notice, which is the notice you give as a landlord when you would like to personally use your property. What the change to that is before it was 60 days, minimum 60 days with 1 month's rent as compensation. So you would have to either, cut them a check for 1 month's rent or, you say, listen, don't pay next month, whatever the case may be. But it's 1 month's rent compensation, 60 days. Now what they're adding is that you can give them 120 days with no compensation. Now, that sounds great on the surface. And in a way it is. And I think for a very minute group of people, it will be, because if you really are, you're a landlord of one home, you're not a serial landlord. Maybe you live upstairs and they live downstairs. It's not like you have this wealth that you're using to be a landlord. But let's say that situation, it will be helpful for you because maybe you're not in a rush, but you also don't have extra money to pay them as compensation. So you can now give them 120 days notice, no compensation, and you're fine. Where this is going to impact a lot of people is now if your tenant doesn't agree to leave, your hearing date is not for at least 120 days.
So you're postponing another
2 months.
2 months
at least, because before 60 days was the period. So if you gave notice, say today, you could go file your application tomorrow, but your hearing date wouldn't be till at least the termination date. So we're in what? We're in December. So your termination date, say the end of February. your hearing date earliest it could be is March 1st. Now with
it's
this
going to be May 1st.
Yeah. So if your tenant is going to leave, no problem, no harm, no issues, you're fine. But if your tenant doesn't leave and you have to go through the landlord and tenant board process, what was taking 60 plus another 90 days, 150 days total is now going to push you to 180, maybe 200 days. So that
almost 6 months.
Yeah. So unless you have no rush at all, which how many people really have no rush?
And especially in this market.
For sure. Then I don't know how useful that changes. Based on what I'm reading, both options are going to be available. So you can either do 120 days no compensation or stick to the 60 days with
great.
The compensation, which again, they haven't made it clear because they're still doing the changes, but that's what it looks like.
Okay.
So that would at least be helpful.
So it depends on what suits you need.
For sure, yeah. So if you are in a
tight time,
yeah,
right?
and you have the money to make the payment, you can do so. So that's the next, I would say, biggest change, because a lot of landlords, because it is difficult to get a tenant out in the sense that unless your tenant is doing something wrong, which is non-payment of rent, they're breaking things, they're causing harm, then it's really difficult to get a tenant out. Sometimes you just don't want to be a landlord anymore, or sometimes you just, they're difficult, but they're not doing anything wrong. So a lot of people were using the N12 to get people out just for the sake of, a tenant.
But that has to be a personal use, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. So because it has to be for personal use, like it is still a very specific set of circumstances that you can let someone out. So the tenant, the reason why they even brought in the compensation was to sort of curb that. But I think this, like for people that are genuine, most people are genuine when they give that notice. It'll be helpful for that group. I'm hoping that they do keep the two options available, so you can sort of decide what makes the most sense for you. Because the point of the compensation is to ensure that they have a breathing room to find another place. So that's the next one. The next change, which actually I think is the biggest change and going to be the most controversial story, is if as a tenant, if you want to raise issues, meaning you're going to complain that your landlord did X, Y, Z, okay? But you have rent arrears, at the hearing for the L1 application for the rent arrears, you cannot raise any tenant issues unless you have paid half of the arrears.
That's a big one.
That is a big one for two things, because if the arrears calculation is incorrect, say, for example, you're a landlord and you disagree with how much is even outstanding, it doesn't matter. You still have to pay half of what the landlord is claiming. So even if you think it's 1 month, but the landlord is saying 2 months, you still have to pay half of what the landlord is saying. So you'd have to pay 1 month up front. So that is a big game changer, because what happens is you have a lot of circumstances where tenants don't pay rent for whatever reason, whether it's related or unrelated. And then when they get to the landlord tenant board hearing, you start hearing about, this leak, and I had to fix this HVAC, and this is not working, and the lights are not working, and all of that. So then you're diluting sort of the issue in front of the board, because you're blaming the landlord for all these things that were never raised before, maybe even if they were sort of in passing, but now there's an emphasis on it because of the fact that you are now before the board and you're scared you're going to get evicted, etc. So that is a very big game changer for landlords, because 100%. It gives the tenant now has some skin in the game, because without paying 50% up front, you can't bring up these issues.
Which is reasonable as well.
For sure. But in contrast to that, understand as a tenant, you have applications available to you. So if you feel the landlord, is not maintaining his or her obligation, as they're supposed to, you have tenant applications that you can bring forward. So what I understand that it seems like this is so unfair, but if you as a tenant truly do not think that your landlord is doing what they're supposed to be doing, you can bring your T5 applications about the landlord's obligations, and you can be proactive about that, as opposed to not paying rent. And someone tells you, if your landlord's not doing this, just don't pay rent, and then you getting in the situation. So I do, as unfair as it is in a sense, I do think that more good will come, in the sense of it'll minimize the the meritless claims that some tenants will bring forward just for the sake of delaying their eviction.
And also keep in mind, not every tenant is being maliciously doing it. The economy is bad.
For sure.
There's a reasonable reason for them to fall behind on the rent as well, right? So,
for sure.
So it depends on who you're dealing with at the end of the day.
That's the problem, though, because everyone looks at this in a different lens. Tenants are looking at it in the lens of these large corporations that own, these big apartment buildings downtown and these quote unquote slum landlords. And then you have landlords looking at this from the lens of these professional tenants who do this for a living. You just go house after house after house, never paying rent. So where both sides are focusing on the bad apples, let's call them, which is such a small percentage, but that's what everyone knows about.
That's the PTSD everyone is having, like hearing the friends and families.
Sure.
No one ever talks about the great tenant.
For sure. No one is ever calling me to say, hey, I have the greatest tenant ever. Everyone's always calling me to be like, my tenant's doing X, Y, Z. What do I do next?
Yeah.
So that I feel is why this is getting so much attention. Some of the changes I do think are needed.
Yeah.
But that's essentially the problem. The next one that is it's more of an administrative change that I don't think we're going to see. Like landlords and tenants won't feel the impact, but like legal professionals, lawyers and paralegals were at their board, because what the act is allowing or doing, is it's placing more guidelines on the discretion of the adjudicators. So, for example, one of the changes is if you want to review an order. So, say an order of eviction has been granted. Maybe you didn't attend as a tenant, even though you got notice. And this happens all the time because it is a delay tactic, unfortunately. You can request an order for a review. And to be honest, if it's the first time, you're almost guaranteed that they are going to allow your review. So what that does is that pauses your eviction, because now you have to go for this review and then whatever. So what the board is doing now is they're putting a little bit more let's call them limits on the discretion of the adjudicator. So before, the discretion was like they unless it was unfair to do so. That was the language. Now they're saying if it's within the guidelines that we provide. So the benefit of that is, there's going to be more predictability. So I don't have to worry if I'm in front of adjudicator X or adjudicator Y that they're going to allow or disallow or whatever the case may be.
It depends on how they look at it.
So here, because we're tightening this sort of discretion, there is more predictability. I can tell if we are going to get this reviewed, or if we're going to be able to continue with our eviction. That's the first benefit. And the second is just there should be standardization across the board, because it's unfair to have some landlords dealt in a certain way and some landlords dealt in another way. So I do think that there's benefit to that. The other place where there's going to be more definition, less discretion, is on the front of ordering an eviction. So right now, a standard order, if you ask for what we call a standard order eviction, it's 11 days. But the board, or the adjudicator, can decide to extend that. So I had one on an N12. They extended it to 30 days. They were just like, they have young children, they need to move, blah, 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 which is fair, don't get me wrong, but they use their discretion to extend that. Now, they can still extend, but they're going to have those guidelines to determine in what circumstances they can extend. Again, I think it's good for standardization and it's good for predictability, which will be helpful. The other change with respect to reviewing an order, so with the discretion, is also the timeline. Before it was 30 days, now it's 15. The benefit of that,
the timeline of
to review an order. So say, for example, the board has issued an eviction. As a tenant, I have 30 days to do a request to review that order. Now I only have 15. Again, because it's a tighter timeline, it does seem like it's so unfair. But already, you're not usually getting your order from the landlord tenant board for, say, 20, maybe 30 days. They always tell you in your hearing within 30 days. So if it's already taking you 30 days to get a hearing, now you have another 30 days for them to request an order before you even schedule the sheriff. And depending on what city you live in, the sheriff can take about 6 weeks to get to you.
Wow.
So let's use Toronto as the example. We have 30 days to get our order, 30 days for them to review it. And now I finally get to schedule with the sheriff. You're looking at 2.5, almost 4.5 months by the time you actually have the eviction. Yeah. So yes, it sounds like, oh, wow, they had 30 days and now they only have 15. It's a long process, blah, blah, blah. But it really, in the grand scheme of things, it is still quite a long timeline. So I do think that is a beneficial sort of change. And again, it's those bad apples, because I've had so many instances where I'll do the process. I'll issue the N4, I file the L1, I give them notice 10 times over. This is the date of your hearing. This is the date of your hearing. This is the date of your hearing. Tenants don't show up because what are they going to say? There's not, most of the time, there's not merit to their defense, let's call it. And then a week later, I'll get an email from the landlord tenant board saying, oh, your tenant is reviewing this order. You can't move forward. And then we get to this review hearing and they still have nothing to say. Like the board is like, okay, why did you miss the hearing? Did you not know? Blah, 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 this and that. Even if they're successful to get the review, when we're back here in 2 months from now for the actual hearing again, there's still nothing for them to bring up as a merit for why they're not paying rent. So I do think that it's beneficial and in these delay tactics, because a lot of these professional tenants have learned to sort of
delay the process.
Yeah, how to game the system, delay the process. They know that, you're always going to get that first one adjourned if you ask for it, things like that. Yeah. So this is really helpful to lower those. And I think overall the changes are needed. Again, the emphasis is because it seems all in favor of the landlord, but I do think that we're only now catching up.
Absolutely.
To give some sort of balance.
I think there's still the delay of the hearing is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, right? So they're saying that they're going to hire more staff, adjudicators, and sheriffs. We haven't they haven't really given more information about that. The other thing that they said is they want to start like a tenant database. So they want to make orders available for other tenants. And some there's already some softwares out there that do that, but I think they want to create like a centralized system, which will allow you to sort of search your tenants, see if they've had any issues or judgments against them.
There's a thing called open room.
Yeah. So, but it's not all of them. So I think they're trying to make it like a standardized system. So,
from the government.
Yeah, from the government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you had to go to a third party to use.
Yeah. So now all the ones available are third parties, but this would be from the government. So I think, take that with a grain of salt, because not everyone that's been to the landlord tenant board is a bad tenant, but it will make you think twice before you do things.
100%. Like every single client, they want to buy investment property, they're scared about the tenant. I'm listen, I deal with a lot of tenants.
Yeah.
You barely have a bad tenant. Mm-hmm. And even if you, in my opinion, if you do a proper due diligence in the beginning, there's so many services available right now. There's a service providers. I'm not trying to promote them, but single key. Yeah. And even TREB, they came up with a news thing called prop text verification. Very minimum charges. Realtors can go in there. They will dial the employer to verify their income or verify the employment as well. It's interesting. One of a couple of people reached out to me on Instagram. I think one of my tenants was on the open room.
Okay.
And they called me to ask for the reference. I said, I'm not going to give you a reference because the incident I had with the tenant is 6 years back.
Yeah, you don't.
And I cannot give you a decision or my recommendation based on my experience with the tenant 6 months back, because within 6 months, 6 years, a lot of things could have been changed in their life.
For sure. Yeah.
Good or a bad, but I don't know. So even when you're going through open rooms and all these third party, don't judge a tenant without you do the proper due diligence, because it could have been at the time they could have gone through some tough times in their life, but they could have figured things out and they moved on to the better life now, right?
And there's also bad landlords. Like, don't get me wrong.
100%.
As much as we hear about the tenants, and you and
there's a bad landlord.
Yeah, we do know, we hear more of the bad tenants. There are definitely bad landlords.
They're never going to talk about it.
Yeah, I have heard people will just more so in passing. They not so much clients, but they'll tell me about some of the rules that landlords have, and I'm like, they're not allowed to do that. Like I had a friend of a friend who said their landlord wouldn't let them have more than one guest in the unit with them. And I was like, that's not allowed at all.
Yeah.
But things like that, like both sides, there are poor landlords and there are poor tenants, which make the whole system the way it is.
Oh, we even had a situation, one of our friends living in the basement, and the landlord was using the basement as a storage while they were living.
Oh my God.
You actually helped my friend out. And they issued the N12 without even a 1 month rent.
Yeah, it's...
The minute you send a letter, they get the check in the mail. So it's not just always the tenants, it's always the landlords as well. But use the service. But sometimes, in my opinion, the economy is so bad. The tenants are not malicious. They could be a great tenant for years. It could be a job loss. It could be health issues. So it could be a lot of things happens in their life as well. I think it's very important to have open communication.
100%. Regardless of these changes, I still think that the best option, obviously given your own circumstances, is to try to work with your tenant, especially if you're a tenant like that. Because I get those calls too. They're like, oh, they were fine for the last 2 years. All of a sudden they're not paying.
So there's something life-changing happening in their life.
Probably something happened. Reach out to them, find out.
Have a conversation.
Yeah. And if it's still not working, then you are open to use your legal resources. But I do think as a first step, it always makes sense to reach out, try to find out what's going on, try to reach a solution between the two of you guys. And if that's not an option, then you move forward with the legal process.
And I also tell a lot of landlords, treat your tenants like your clients.
Yep.
At the end of the day, they are your clients.
They're also in your home.
In your home. And also they're your clients. They are actually helping you to build real estate wealth. So treat them with the respect. Treat them with what they deserve. Like, don't have the mentality of I'm a landlord and you are a tenant. Like, treat them with the respect and they will treat you with the respect.
No, for sure. I agree. That's such a good point. I do agree with that.
So this is the most... Is it happening recently? I'm sure you're probably experiencing as well. A lot of landlords, they have a property, they have a tenant, but they are losing the house. They're on a power sale.
Yep.
Anything you can comment on, any experience you are seeing?
So I am seeing that. As I do also work for lenders, so I see it from that side as well. The lender will become the landlord. So as the tenant, so long as you are fulfilling your obligations under your lease, the lender, is not able to kick you out. But it is very difficult because as a lender too, you don't want to become a landlord. You're not here to to be a landlord. You're here to make money through lending.
You're in a lending business. You're on a rental business.
So it is a very difficult situation because now you have an additional party that everyone needs to consider, both the landlord and the lender. So lenders, in a way, are less... I don't want to call it aggressive, but they don't like taking over properties with tenants in them because you don't know who this person is. You don't know if they're a good tenant, bad tenant, whatever the case may be. So you do have, at least from what I've seen, you have lenders that are a little bit more willing to work with the landlord because they'd rather willingly get their money as opposed to now taking over a house, having to deal with the tenant and selling a property with, and we all know what selling a property with a tenant is like.
100%.
So it is a very delicate situation, but again, so long as the tenant is not doing something wrong, the lender essentially steps into the shoes of the landlord.
And are you seeing more of these things happening right now?
Yeah. So power of sales generally, power of sales with tenanted properties are also on the rise. To be honest, it's just that rent is no longer covering mortgage. So you have these situations where, your rent is maybe $25,000, $33,000, but your cost to maintain this house is maybe closer to $4,500. So when you're losing money every month, at a point that's going to catch up.
That's the first thing they let go before the principal home, right?
Yeah,
like everyone.
For sure, yeah.
Investment property is the first one to let go.
Yeah, so that is where, we are definitely seeing a lot more. We're also seeing a lot on renewals. You have these lenders that are just not willing to renew because the LTV is not. The LTV is not what it used to be. So you may have been a great borrower. You may have made your payments on time, in full every month, no issues. But now you're on the renewal and your lender is doing the numbers, and it doesn't make sense from a numbers point of view to renew with you. So you are in the situation where now you have to go find another lender. And I'm sure qualifying is
not easy.
It's not easy. It's also a long process. So because of that, you do have a lot more properties that are going up for power of sale. I always say last year when I did power of sales, I only had one that got to the point where we had to get the sheriff to come and evict, and like game over, we're done.
Remember that.
Yeah. But this year, I am at 4, and I am at 4 with borrowers that have waved the white flag. They're like, listen, take the house. I've tried my best. I have no solution. You try and sell it and get whatever you can from it. So it's that I've definitely, even in my own practice, I've seen that shift. So I imagine as a market wide, that is exponential.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. It's not no one wants to be in that place. Lenders don't want to be there. Borrowers don't want to be there.
And in between the tenants.
Yeah. So it's not a place that anyone wants to be, but it's unfortunately just a reality of how the market is right now.
Perfect. Anything else you want to add on, Gathya, before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it. Be a good landlord, be a good tenant. And
Okay.
I think everything will work out.
If anyone have any issues or they want to get a legal opinion, what's the best way to get hold of you?
The best way to reach out to us is...
It could be a landlord or a tenant.
Yeah, landlord, tenant, or a tenant, sorry. The best way to reach out to us is you can give us a call at the office. I would like to think Vedan's going to put our information below.
Okay.
So you can just reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
for being here.
Thank
I appreciate
you so much.